On March 12th, 2001, I was there.
February 24th, 2001, the day I became a sucker. One problem I had in my 20s, when I got into romantic entanglements, I would do crazy things for them. I'll go into further details of my days as a Latter-day Saint at another time.
I think I'm ready to tell this story.
It began in May of 2000. I met this beautiful raven-haired woman full of energy and passion, but she would be another face to come and go from my life. I moved on and endured a lonely summer of baseball games, visits to Nickel City, working to Kiss music while redoing my bedroom closet, and watching Detroit Rock City on repeat. 3 months later, we would cross paths again. Another fall semester would begin as I continued the long and winding road to graduation. I'd turn the wooing dial up to 11 and I would end up winning her hand. Sure beats winning over the heart of a woman living in another time zone via the NHL chat rooms. I did that for 3 years and it was a waste. The timeline of my days as a saint were as follows. The courtship between this woman and me began in early September. Despite her living in another town that required traversing on 2-lane roads, I didn't care. We talked on the phone as often as possible, spent time together at school as often as possible in between classes, and made time for each other as often as possible outside of school. Even though I would go through another hellish Friday night at work on my birthday, she had a couple of gifts for me. A dozen roses, and a few days later, a book. But it wasn't just a book. It was a book that had been available for free all over the world for many years. The Book of Mormon. Not that Book of Mormon. The actual Book of Mormon. And so it began. In a time of my life when I still had Tuesday nights off work, I went to my girlfriend's house to watch Monty Python and the Holy Grail. After 30 minutes of zany hilarity, we would get a visit from a pair of missionaries. Yes, 2 young men or women that normally traveled in pairs. The men were always wearing white-collar shirts, black slacks, and neckties. The women were always wearing their Sunday's best dresses. To get the ball rolling on converting someone, one would have to go through a series of discussions with the missionaries. They would range in topics from the plan of God, the gospel of Jesus, the restoration of the church, 3 levels of heaven, stuff like that. While I was being groomed, I wanted a Sunday off work to go to a church service with... Hold on. I think I'm going to put a name on this woman while protecting her innocence in the story that no one is going to hear anyway. Got it. Lucy. As I was saying, I got a full Sunday off work to attend an LDS service with Lucy and her family. I happened to get that day off on one of the 2 most important weekends of the LDS calendar year. Every first weekend in April and every first weekend in October was the semi-annual general conferences. Mormon members from all over would gather at their nearest meeting house to watch via satellite or on BYU TV selected leaders of the church speak. The first presidency of the church would also be featured speakers during those weekends. The first presidency is where the president of the church would be. He, and I do mean he, would also be known as the prophet. In the year 2000, it was Gordon B. Hinckley. Hinckley served as the LDS prophet from 1995 up until his death in 2008. While I missed an epic Battle of the Bay football game that went to overtime, I would continue to be immersed by the Latter-day Gospel. Hey, I even checked off another discussion with the missionaries that evening. As time went on, my grooming continued. The 6th and final discussion was wrapped up in January 2001. I was faced with a decision, which I made much to the chagrin of some people. I would be joining the flock. I chose the date to get baptized, February 24th, 2001. Why? Because Saturday. I had a suit picked out. I would have Lucy's father do the honors of putting his potential son-in-law in the water. On the morning of my baptism, I would be interviewed by an elder that took no part of the 6 discussions I sat through. After singing hymns and the bishop of our ward telling my life story, it was time to get dunked. A day later, at my first Sunday service as a Mormon, I would be confirmed as a member, and a week later, I would be ordained an Aaronic priest. I had a job that needed me on Sundays, but my boss was nice enough to give me every other Sunday off. I would be at a church service every Sunday either way. On the Sundays I worked, I was able to attend a morning service in my town. I would be surrounded by families on those mornings in the 3rd Ward. If I was off on Sunday, I would be up in Morgan Hill with the Ensign Ward. It was also known as the Young Singles Ward. The people in there were between the ages of 18 and 30, and were either hoping to find their mate or have already done so and are just waiting for the big day, becoming sealed with their mate in a holy temple for time and all eternity. After the baptism and confirmation, I had to go through another series of discussions. They were lessons on how to live like a Latter-day Saint, living a life striving for perfection, staying on the straight and narrow path, spreading the gospel, being simple and clean. Only this time the task would go to 2 people that were in the Ensign Ward. They didn't have to be held in a church building. In fact, I had a discussion held on one of the many beaches in the Santa Cruz area. Over this period of time, the love between Lucy and I continued to bloom. Our courtship kept going while I was getting my feet wet on my new spiritual journey. We took a trip to Great America, I took her to a Sharks game in January, and we saw a few movies together. She even talked me into dressing up for Halloween, something I hadn't done in years. She got me into the Tony Award-winning musical The Phantom of the Opera. It would be fitting that we would dress the parts, I being the angel of music, and she was Christine Daae. At the end of the spring semester in 2001, we went to this party at a friend's house dressed as if we were going to a formal. Despite the ups and downs, we were still going. On June 11th, 2001, before I was about to go to work, Lucy called me. It was a phone call I don't remember too well to this day, but I do remember one thing. She was breaking up with me. I was devastated. I made radical changes to my life, and it was for one reason only, to marry this woman. While I was saddened, I was also angry. She would call me the next day to see if I was all right. I wasn't. She continued to poke the bear. She wanted me to tell her what I was feeling. Hey, she was asking for it. I wrote her a letter, and on June 17th, I gave it to her before my priesthood meeting with the men. After the meeting was over and we were going to gather for Sunday service, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. A mere 5 words were exchanged as I gently touched her shoulder and walked away to find a seat for Sunday service. The TLDR version? The Lord told her one thing, but the Lord told me that I could do better. Also, I asked for my stuff back because reasons. Even one of Lucy's brothers commended me for putting her on blast. Lucy still wanted a friendship after using me to boost the church's numbers. I wasn't interested, but I still kept coming to church, putting on the same brave face I did during that summer. Then a romance blossomed in the middle of September, but it wasn't another lucky girl in the ward. It was outside the flock. But that's a whole different video that I will get around to. However, this new girl gave me courage to break free. Courage would be my ticket out of there. On October 7th, during a Sunday off work, I would sit through a session of the 171st Semi-Annual General Conference in a daze. I even fell asleep during one of the talks and woke up before we sang the hymn "Let Us All Press On" at the halfway point. I wasn't really paying a lot of attention to what was being said via satellite from the Salt Lake Temple Square. I decided that I had enough of falling short of perfection. I wanted out, and I decided that in 2 weeks' time, I would be doing that. On October 21st, I would go to one last service in Gilroy's ward. In between that service and my afternoon meetings in Morgan Hill, I watched the San Jose Earthquakes complete a remarkable worst of first season as they won the MLS Cup for the first time in franchise history. After the euphoria of seeing my local footy team win a championship wore off, I would drive to Morgan Hill for one last hurrah. After the service was over, I sat down with the bishop of my ward and told him I was leaving. The day after, I sent an email to my friends letting them know I left the church. For some reason, Lucy replied with some pent-up vitriol. Why did she care? I was free from her, and she was free from me. I think my exit from the church sent the message. She no longer had a hold on me. Off and on, as I was savoring my reclaimed freedom despite recovering from another breakup, I continued to get calls from church members asking me to come back. It seemed that while I was gone, my name and phone number was still available to them. When I left, I didn't go through the proper steps to get my name removed from the church records. When I wrote my exit letter in 2001, I addressed it to the bishop of my ward. The proper step was to address it to the church itself in Salt Lake City. Thanks to the power of the internet, I wrote what I wanted to say, addressed it to the church records office, and walked it over to the bishop of the Ensign Ward. From September 17, 2002 on, I waited. A few days after Christmas, I received a simple piece of mail from the Latter-day Saints. My name was no longer on their records. It was as if I never existed. The letter also stated that if I wanted to return, call my nearest pair of missionaries. It's been 20 years since I got that letter. I still not have expressed any interest to return. The reasons I left the Latter-day Saints were small, but it was a snowball effect. To start with, the Sundays I had off were a 3-hour grind. I'm more of a morning person. The Ensign Ward met in the afternoon. My LDS meeting in the Ensign Ward started with an all-male priesthood meeting. The women had their own meeting, but in the first hour, the sexes were separated. Sunday school followed, and then the Sunday service. Personally, I didn't complain about it, but there were times after the breakup with Lucy that I wanted to be somewhere else. The 3-hour grind was the least of my problems. The main reason? I lost my purpose to be there. Lucy left me, but she also helped put a black mark on me before she did. There were times before my baptism, and even after that, we fooled around, if you know what I mean. One day she spilled the beans to her parents and even admitted to cheating on me. Like the young idiot I was, I forgave her instead of telling her to go pound sand. The aftermath of her confession was devastating as well. So much that I would be disciplined for it. For 5 months, I faced disfellowship, or as the euphemism stated in the church's handbook in 2020, formal membership restrictions. I could attend meetings, but I couldn't do anything else. I couldn't partake of the sacrament. I couldn't do any tasks the church asked of me. I couldn't open or close the meeting with a prayer. To them, I was simply a warm body in spiritual rehab. It wasn't until I declined to open a priesthood meeting in prayer due to my disfellowship that the bishop decided to, in his words, turn me loose. Also, after Lucy left me and I was in disfellowship, what young woman in that ward would give a severely flawed new convert the time of day? No, I lost the very reason why I was in that church. Call it silly, but I was not going to get what I wanted in life by staying there. Having said that, it was not a recurring nightmare being a Mormon. Lucy not only helped me meet new people at the church, but she helped me meet new people in general during that time. She was part of a group of friends that would stand by my side even after Lucy kicked me to the curb. One of them would become my wife. I made new friends in the church and reconnected with some familiar faces from my past. I had no idea that in my youth, I attended classes with some of the Latter-day Saints. I even made friends with the missionaries. Each one I met was an upstanding individual, especially one that was from Canada and was a huge Edmonton Oilers fan. I even invited the 2 missionaries that I began my journey with to my baptism. I remember one Monday night after an activity with the Ensign Ward, I would be talking to this fellow known to our ward as Colonel Sanders for so long that someone called the cops on us and we had to go home. Monday nights were a blast. At least the Monday nights I was off work. I mentioned this in my I Was There video discussing my dad's death. Mondays were actually fun for all the LDS members. It was a day off for the traveling missionaries, and for the rest of the millions, it was family home evening. In the Ensign Ward, they were a riot, a wholesome opportunity to get in touch with our inner child. We did karaoke with me singing Blind Melon, played mini golf, played kickball. One summer evening, we played probably the most interesting game of softball I have ever played, backwards softball. Instead of batting right, I was batting left. Instead of running to first, I would run to third if I made contact. Another gathering I took part in was the first Sunday of the month that wasn't April or October. It was known as Fast Sunday. Members were encouraged to fast for most of the day. An open mic Sunday service would take place where anyone would come up and bear testimony. After the service, many of us would go to either the bishop's house or one of the 2 counselors' houses in Gorge. It was a full-blown potluck, and it allowed us to catch up on stuff and ponder what the next Monday night activity would be. A month before I got baptized, I would get to visit a Mormon temple. In 2001, temples in California were very rare. As a matter of fact, they still are. I would visit the second oldest LDS temple in the state in Oakland. I have in my travels seen the temple in the San Diego area in 2004. It was everything I expected it to be. Even though I would never set foot in the building, I was in awe of such marvelous architecture. The last cherished memory I would like to share of my days as a saint was the singing of the hymns. It didn't matter which Sunday service I attended. I would look at a board, gaze at the numbers, and look forward to giving it my all, even if I did flub a word or get a note wrong. 20 years after I left the Latter-day Saints, many of the hymns held dear by them still bring back pleasant memories, especially in those minutes of singing the sacrament hymn. That was probably the most sobering experience ever. I've seen people cry as they sang something like reverently and meekly now. I remember one April afternoon, as the prospect of disfellowship loomed over me, I was trying to hold it together as I sang Jesus Once of Humble Birth. I don't think I've wept as much as I did in those 4 minutes. I attended a Sunday morning service on the day after my birthday. As the people in the church, as well as the United States, still had heavy hearts after September 11th, hymn 196 was on the playlist that morning. I would sing it strong and not shed a single tear. Like an old-timer who had fond memories of the music from a particular decade, I too had fond memories of singing an LDS hymn or 10. I would like to consider my days as a saint a learning experience that has stayed with me. Do I regret joining them only to leave? Surprisingly, no. It was a stepping stone for me. Being a Mormon for a short period of time was just the beginning of something more. Sometimes to be truly home on a spiritual journey, you will have to spend the night at temporary ones along the way. I appreciate your time hearing this story. Go in peace.